USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
At Starbucks, we've more than doubled paid parental leave, now up to 18 weeks. Which means Starbucks baristas can spend more time with the best company they know, their families. At Starbucks, benefits like parental leave are just the start.
Reese's peanut butter cups are the greatest, but let me play devil's advocate here. Let's see. So, no, that's a good thing. That's definitely not a problem. Reese's, you did it. You stumped this charming devil.
This episode is brought to you by Diet Coke. You know that moment when you just need to hit pause and refresh? An ice-cold Diet Coke isn't just a break. It's your chance to catch your breath and savor a moment that's all about you. Always refreshing, still the same great taste. Diet Coke. Make time for you time.
Did my card go through?
Oh no. Your small business depends on its internet. So switch to Verizon Business. And you could get LTE business internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data for unlimited business.
There we go.
Get the internet you need at the price you want. Verizon Business. Starting price for LTE business internet, 25 megabits per second, unlimited data plan with select Verizon Business smartphone plan savings. Terms apply.
Hey, thanks for listening to Reversing Climate Change. I'm your host, Ross Kenyon. Before we get going, I'd love to tell you a little bit about our sponsors. They make the show possible. I would love it if you could listen for just a minute while I tell you about Philip Lee, LLP, and Arbonics. If you work in carbon removal, you very well may have come across Philip Lee, LLP's work. I originally saw Philip Lee give a presentation about some of the common provisions within offtake agreements, and I was impressed by the quality of their scholarship and their work, and I'm happy that we were able to stay in touch and finally do this together. I think the law is an underrepresented part of what happens within carbon removal. We assume it's the background, we assume it's the mechanics. It actually takes a very smart and creative person to be a good lawyer. I think if you've ever had a bad lawyer, you know that there's quite a big difference between a good and a bad lawyer. And what's good about Philip Lee, beyond the good experience that I've had personally, is that they're also just the largest legal team dedicated to the financing and development of carbon projects globally. They actually were awarded Environmental Finance's VCM Law Firm of the Year for each of the last 2 previous years. And they have offices in the US, Europe, and the UK. If you have business law needs around nature-based carbon projects or engineered ones, if you're working with sustainable aviation fuels and the integration with Corsia, anything to do with the VCM generally, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the CRCF that's coming out of the EU now, get in touch with Philip Lee. If you're working in this space, you really do need a good eye to the law. These projects need legal care. There's a lot of structuring that takes place. It's really not turnkey at this point still. And there's a lot more innovation and creativity that's going to be needed to make sure that the legal infrastructure that supports carbon removal is there. So, link is in the show notes. Go check out Philip Lee. Our other sponsors are Arbonics. Arbonics is great. They've been on the podcast before. I did a show with Lizette Luik, which I'll link to in the show notes too if you want to go listen to that show I did with Lizette. Arbonics is working on forestry in the Baltic states of Europe. Europe used to be much more heavily forested. The great majority of forestry projects take place in the global south, which is generally a good thing, but we also do need forestry to take place in the EU and in Europe as well. Arbonics has put out some great research recently about the state of afforestation projects, about the bottlenecks in the industry, why the high quality credits are selling out far ahead of issuance, what that means for people who want to be buying carbon removal credits for forestry but cannot. It's a really important set of questions that Arbonics addresses with grace. I would recommend you checking out their work and also just checking out Arbonics in general. If you want to support forestry, give Arbonics a look. Link is in the show notes there. Thanks for listening, and now I will go into the show itself. Thanks for your time. Here it is. Hello and welcome to the Reversing Climate Change podcast. I'm Ross Kenyon. I'm a carbon removal entrepreneur. I have a great show today. I really like that lately, almost by accident, I've been getting more and more stories from very seasoned climate tech entrepreneurs who have actually deployed a lot and have had great amounts of success in moving from a pitch deck to steel in the ground, you might say. Before I introduce our guest, if you could please rate and review the podcast in your podcast app of choice, give it a full rating, write it a review if you love the show. Help get the show out to more people. I would be so appreciative if you could do that. There's also a paid subscriber option on Spotify, where if you would like to get rid of the programmatic ads, if you want bonus content, that is available to you for $5 a month, and it really helps the show remain financially viable. In any case, today my guest is Matt Atwood, who is the founder and CEO of Aircapture. Matt's had a fascinating career and also just took a route into direct air capture that is unusual. We talk about it in the show. I used to hear so much about turning captured carbon into products, finding a way to make direct air capture and carbon removal generally work without an over-reliance on policy or an over-reliance on voluntary carbon market credits. And Aircapture has done just that. They just raised a $50 million Series A. They're working with modular direct air capture that, among other things, is providing beverage-grade CO2. There are some markets that they need CO2, and that direct air capture, miraculously, is the most cost-effective way, logistically least complex way of getting the carbon dioxide to the place that it needs to be. And while not all of these mechanisms produce negative emissions, any amount of separation of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases from ambient air is helping us learn how to do that better in other applications. It brings the cost curves down. It increases the talent pool who know how to work with this technology. This is a really important thing. And Matt's out there leading the charge, actually getting projects like this built. I'm amazed he kept the faith doing it this way, because I feel like it went out of fashion a long time ago. But that's the thing about fashion. There's a line in, is it from A Mighty Wind? What is that? The guys from Spinal Tap in A Mighty Wind say it's, they've been retro so long that fashion has caught back up to them, and it's no longer retro, it's nowtro. And Aircapture is a good example of it being nowtro. Did not expect to be talking about A Mighty Wind on this podcast introduction, but I just love that utilization has been quietly chugging along, or this could be my bias just because I'm working primarily in carbon removal, but it's been chugging along, and it's just nice to see the people who really believed in their vision proven right, that this is actually a really powerful commercial strategy and go-to-market that others should be looking at too. It isn't all about carbon credits. It isn't all about immediate negative emissions. There are other things that we can do that make companies commercially successful, that allow us to develop technology, build the skills, build the talent that will provide for a carbon negative future. If you like the sound of that, you're going to enjoy this show, because Matt and I talk about this at length. So without further ado, here is the show with Matt. Thanks for listening.
Shh. Hear that? Big waves are calling. Dive into refreshment with Kona Big Wave. Tropical flavor and the taste of aloha in every drop. This summer, don't just listen. Join Kona on the Big Wave Bonfire Tour. More information at konabigwave.com/bigwavemusic. Kona Big Wave. Liquid Aloha. Copyright 2025 Kona Brewing Co., St. Louis, Missouri. Mahalo for enjoying responsibly.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Abercrombie's viral denim sale is back, and Spotify listeners get an extra 15% off with code SpotifyAF. Abercrombie is known for their denim. With 30 to 50% off all jeans, find out how denim should fit. Shop the viral denim sale in the Abercrombie app, online, or in stores. Valid in stores and online through August 11th, 2025 in U.S. and Canada. Excludes clearance, price reflects discount. Code valid in U.S. and Canada through August 11th, 2025. Exclusions apply. See details online.
Thanks for being here, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Ross.
How could you possibly raise $50 million right now? Just how?
Well, it's it's a longer story and it's a longer time, but it is a very challenging fundraising environment at the moment. But at the end of the day, I think what we're doing is pretty specific relative to carbon dioxide removals and direct air capture in general. I mean, I think our approach to commercializing the technology is to go after kind of smaller on-site markets where people are purchasing the CO2, customers, companies that need CO2. And that's a very mature market. And we're able to, provide a service to our customers, CO2 that they need, where they need it, at cost competitive prices from where they're getting it. And I think that, kind of really sets us apart in the market against, our ability to raise money compared to all these other DAC companies and things like that. So, I think that's been a long-term strategy of ours, and it independent of the timing and the challenge of the market, worked out for us.
Probably close to a decade ago, carbon to value was a much bigger conversation. There's a moment where carbontech was even a term that was being thrown around that implied some sort of material or other value being created beyond just atmospheric benefit, carbon credits. It used to be a thing. We used to think about it as being the forking path, and maybe there was some overlap, but you pretty much chose if you want to go for carbon market revenue and also maybe policy support, or if you just want to produce something of value out of carbon. And I think almost everyone seemingly has chosen to go the route of the carbon credit and of focusing on things like 45Q and policy support. And I almost never hear of anyone doing anything interesting with carbon dioxide. And that could be personal failure. There are things like, I did a show recently with Makoto from Homeostasis when they're making graphite. So there is stuff like that is afloat. But for whatever reason, maybe it's just the environment that I'm in, but I don't really hear that much about it. But clearly you've kept the faith, and it has led to a successful commercial strategy that is starting to bear fruit. Do you think people got ensorcelled or something by carbon credits? Like, why don't more people copy you? Why did we go down a different path?
Well, I think it's, I think there's a couple things there. I think one is it's technology pathway dependent. So certain technologies really only work at larger scales, right? And so you have to have larger demand for CO2, and the only large scale demand for CO2 right now is sort of sequestration. Synthetic fuels aren't quite there. And the merchant market of CO2, or people that are buying CO2 to put into beverages or, the built environment, whatever it might be, that's a transportation logistics issue. But, I came to this, I've been working in the carbontech space since the early 2000s, first generation biofuels. And then I ran a second generation biofuel company, an algae technology company. We were doing kind of wastewater treatment and fuel production. And I needed a CO2 supply. So I came kind of at it, direct air capture, from the perspective of, I'm a buyer. I need this material. And over time, I was looking at different DAC technologies, and finally the light bulb went off that it made more sense for me to build a larger number of smaller machines than kind of a smaller number of larger machines. And that'll get us on the learning curve more quickly. We can commercialize into the mature markets. And I think that's the right kind of long-term strategy to being the lowest cost technology provider, at scale for things like sequestration, synthetic fuel, et cetera.
And you focus, at least to start, with beverage carbonation. Is that correct?
We're working in beverage carbonation. We're also, we have a sequestration project that we developed in the UAE. We're developing other large-scale sequestration projects in the US. We're also working on CO2 to like concrete applications in Asia. So we focus on not just the DAC technology, but also what's required to get the CO2 to market in the quality, purity that our customers need. So that could be CO2 gas for applications like concrete cement, and it could be ultra high, purity liquid CO2 for beverage and food producers.
I thought you had started the show off by saying that the forking path kept you out of the sequestration market because it favors economies of scale. Did I misunderstand, or is there just more nuance to that story than maybe we set out with?
I think there's more nuance to the story. So we set out with the intention that our go-to-market strategy would be focusing on kind of beverage applications in the existing kind of mature market of CO2. But we did develop a project in the UAE and got some X Prize support for that, doing a sequestration project. And we're also doing DOE-funded engineering studies for large-scale deployments of sequestration. But the reality for sequestration is, it's a challenge to commercially develop these projects because you kind of have a chicken and egg issue. And that kind of comes back to project finance. How are you going to get a long-term creditworthy offtake agreement at the scales required for sequestration? How are you going to make these bankable? And the infrastructure required at these scales to inject the CO2 is very expensive. So, I think our view is we'll get there eventually. We're going to focus on the near term on these mature markets. We're going to do the engineering work and the scale up work for the sequestration projects. But our commercial strategy and focus is on-site selling of CO2 to customers that demand it.
My understanding of how beverages work is that there's typically syrup is sent around the world essentially, and then it gets carbonated in place because transporting liquids is not a very efficient way to move matter around. It's heavy. And so having it on site at some point makes financial sense, especially in markets for which transport are expensive. Like I saw that the Canary Islands is a market that you're working in beverage carbonation. I imagine shipping CO2 there is expensive.
Yes, exactly. I mean, beverage grade CO2 is liquid CO2. So, we have customers that are paying $2,000+ a ton for CO2. And then we have customers that are paying $400 a ton for that kind of same CO2. And what drives the cost is the infrastructure, the logistics, the transportation, and all that that's associated with that.
Do you think being a more modular system allows you to compete on different frontiers than the more centralized direct air capture providers? How do you go up against something that is centralized and lots of steel in the ground and be able to deliver a better unit cost product?
I mean, we believe that modular, our modular approach to DAC will be a lower overall cost, even at these larger sequestration kind of scale projects. You sort of have the question of capital efficiency. How efficient is the capital that you put in the ground, and then obviously energy efficiency. And so in a lot of these larger projects, you do get some more energy efficiency by sharing certain resources we call balance of plant, so compressors, boilers, pipelines, stuff like that. But from the DAC core process, you don't get more energy efficiency, and you get less capital efficiency by building larger and larger machines the way that we do it. And again, this is really technology dependent. High temperature DAC works differently. But we think that this approach, is the most efficient approach, kind of both for smaller scale embodiments and for larger scale embodiments.
I kind of want to put on a white hat hacker hat here and be like, how do I break that? Where is it fragile? What assumptions do you have built into modularity that may or may not hold as the years come out? There are various trends inside of carbon removal that looks like something is going really well. And then, oops, turns out the hydrology of enhanced weathering is really confusing. And we don't actually know if this is removing carbon on net in some cases.
Right.
Like, what is that for modular DAC? Like, is there something like that looms that you're just like, oh, I really hope this goes our way as we scale?
I mean, I don't, it's a great question. So you can't answer that in terms of like DAC in general. You kind of have to divide it into DAC pathways, right? So for the way that we do it, which is kind of ultra low pressure drop, amine-based contactors, having smaller scale modular machines it comes down to what's your capital efficiency. Modular scale production decreases our capital costs, decreases our supply chain issues, and significantly decreases our logistics costs because we build these into shipping containers, so we can just deliver them to site, drop them, plug them in, they turn on. I mean, with the project we did in the UAE, we had all of our infrastructure, which was CO2 capture from the air, all the way to supercritical CO2 injection into the wellhead, delivered from the port to the site and fully operational in just over 2 weeks. So we were able to take our machines, drop them, plug them in, turn them on, and inject CO2 in that time frame. So from a speed to deployment, logistics, costs of everything that's associated with that, modular DAC has a lot of advantages. But it may have higher labor costs, for example, than a large purpose-built machine. You may have to look at some of these other things, but we don't see that as being a primary driver.
Why would there be higher labor costs for more modular production of captured carbon? I think I would imagine a facility that was enormous would probably have more people in hard hats running around than a couple of shipping containers.
Well, I mean, if you think about total capacity, so like we have shipping containers that are 1,000 tons, right? And we have 100,000 ton facility. So we're going to have 100 shipping containers, whereas, another approach might have one or two large machines doing this. Mm-hmm. So if we have 100 different machines, it may involve more kind of O&M costs. But O&M costs are a very small percentage of the overall cost to do this. So, I really think it really is technology dependent. I mean, it really comes down to what is going to be the most energy efficient and capital cost efficient, technology deployment at scale when this infrastructure is mature and ready to go. And the reality today in removals, especially for DAC and geologic sequestration and mineralization is, it's going to take a long time for some of this infrastructure to get built.
We've used this term a few times, capital efficiency. I wonder if you can explain to someone who is not a super savvy MBA what that is and why that's important. I don't think a lot of people come into carbon removal hurling around terms like that and thinking about it at that scale. I think it's one of those things that gets beat into you that you're like, oh, actually, it turns out we need to think very carefully about this as we grow.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because it actually has a fundamental kind of value proposition in DAC that most people don't understand. So capital efficiency is what's your levelized capital cost per ton of, for example, CO2 capture. So that could be $5 a ton, $50 a ton, $100 a ton, depends on what it costs you to build the machine, build the infrastructure, balance the plant, get it operational. And then you separate that from energy kind of OpEx. So what's the energy cost of that? And then non-energy OpEx, which is labor, insurance, that. But the interesting thing about DAC as it comes to, our capital cost efficiency is most people in the, kind of chemical process, oil and gas, world think you build a bigger plant, it becomes more capital efficient. But that's not true with direct air capture and with pulling CO2 out of the air where CO2 is very dilute. It's not the case that if you build a bigger machine, your capital efficiency increases. And that's counterintuitive to most people that think about these kinds of processes.
Are there some processes within direct air capture that actually do become more capital efficient with scale?
Yeah, the high temperature DAC processes. So, you have your the processes that like companies, carbon engineering, Oxy are doing, where you have to achieve very high temperatures in order to get this CO2 off the capture substrate. And when you're looking at these very high temperature applications, in order to make it capital efficient and energy efficient, you need a bigger machine. And it's just not going to make sense at smaller machines, just because the cost of building, a smaller one versus a larger one, it's not linear.
Segment this out for us a little bit. Are you imagining a future where the high temp solid sorbent DAC project developers are going to be serving one market or set of markets, and you're going to be doing something parallel, maybe not even crossing paths as much as we might imagine? It's a separate thing entirely.
It's a little bit of both. So the high temperature DAC, kind of processes, these are kind of large, kind of stick-built projects that are going to have to produce a large volume of CO2, per capital plant. And so if you think about those applications, they're going to be sequestration. In the future, there might be fuel synthesis, or they might be able to put these projects next to CO2 pipelines where other people are pulling CO2 off the pipeline in the future. But they're not going to make sense for smaller scale applications like beverage carbonation customers, food applications, anything in the merchant market. But we believe that our approach to DAC, even at very large scales, will be lower cost than the high temperature DAC approaches ultimately.
What about direct air capture that's even more modular or even smaller? Thinking about HVAC. Where does that fit in? Is that the only way to become more modular than what you're doing?
We build a variety of machines at different scales. So we actually kind of build machines that sort of are applicable in the HVAC space. But the problem with sort of HVAC application is, what do you do with the CO2? Who's going to buy it? How do you valorize that? That's a sort of service application where you can remove CO2 from the building and you can reduce the building's energy envelope. But then the other side of the equation is, how do you sell the CO2 and what does that look like? We have customers that are using 30 to 50 tons of CO2 per year at a given site. We have customers that are using thousands, and then, we're building projects in the millions of tons scale. We're engineering these projects.
The press release about the Series A focused on being policy independent and carbon credit independent to some degree. But you've also mentioned a number of sequestration projects that go beyond this sort of more immediate valorization of captured carbon. How does that work? Because you're more independent of the policy spookiness, I guess you can say. And who knows what's going to happen with VCM for carbon removal. But you also have access to it. So I guess you seem like someone who is extremely commercially minded. I'm sure you have this all forecast out with about 100 different contingencies built into it. But what actually does the future look like? Or are you just trying to make sure that no matter what comes, you are solvent?
So what we believe is it comes down to Wright's law. So Wright's law states that for every doubling of technology production, you get a certain percentage decrease in costs. So the example everybody likes is kind of gives us solar, right? Solar has had what's called a 21% learning curve rate since it was developed in the 70s, and now it's the cheapest form of energy. And when you think about learning curve rates, and you think about like how do you accelerate learning curve rates, from a climate change perspective, we want fastest learning curve rates as possible, and we want these projects to be financeable. And so to accelerate your learning curve rates, you want to deploy your technology rapidly. You want to do it in commercial applications, and you want to do it at relatively lower costs and shorter times for each technology doubling. So if you're building a much larger capital plant, your doubling rate is going to be a lot more expensive and take a lot more time than if you're commercializing in the near term into the beverage market, the food market, things like this. So we can be on that learning curve cost reduction curve while generating good income and good revenues and building a strong business. And that work is required, and that cost reduction curve is required in order to finance these larger scale sequestration projects. Because the reality is, in order to make these projects bankable, you have to be able to get, project financing. The banks have to see that you've been operating these in the real world, that they're reliable, who's going to take the technology risk. And when we think about, what are the steps that are required to build these larger scale projects, and what we're doing right now, it's like an EPC style project, engineering, procurement, construction. So we're doing the feed engineering work, the front engineering design work for these larger scale projects, so that we have a very high degree of confidence in what it's going to cost to build these large projects. So what's the capital cost going to be? What's the energy cost going to be? And the engineering required to get to that point so you can actually make an investment decision in these large scale sequestration projects is a real effort that takes oftentimes years to do. And so we're kind of doing both of those things in parallel, but we're commercializing immediately into the merchant market of CO2, where our customers are already buying CO2 to put into the products that they're selling to customers today.
Perhaps just to refine my question a little bit more, if you only have the merchant market for CO2, but Microsoft turns off the faucet, Frontier turns off the faucet, Japan's GX leak never takes off, the ETS integration doesn't happen, is Aircapture a viable business? Are you okay just on the markets that you're already serving right now?
Yeah, absolutely. We are. I mean, the merchant market of CO2 is a little opaque, but call it a $25 to $30 billion per year business and growing substantially. There's more demand for CO2. New technologies are coming out that need CO2 to make into fuels or plastics or diamonds or whatever, and the beverage industry is growing, the food industry is growing. So there's a demand for more and more CO2. And CO2 production sources are dwindling in the US and Europe, and there's common supply disruptions. So the merchant market for CO2 is a large market. And if it was the only thing we focused on, it would be a great business for us. But we have other things that we're doing at the same time.
I love it. You're very robust. And oftentimes I'm talking to companies that are not robust, and I'm encouraging them to become more robust. But then when I talk to robust companies, I now have to ask about focus. Is it not hard to go to market with all of these different applications all around the world? It seems very operationally complex.
Well, that's the nice thing about having a modular system is, it's an a la carte menu for our customers. You could choose one of these or two of these or three of these and one or two of these, and then that's what you get. So it's a modular machine. So the same machine is going to our customers. If they need gas, they get the DAC machine. If they need liquid, they get the DAC machine, our liquefaction machine. That's it. While it increases the complexity to be in different markets on some level, our business providing CO2 as a service to our customers looks the same from ours. They're buying the CO2, whether they're buying gas, whether they're buying liquid. And there's some complexities always in how we integrate because our machines are our customer site. So sometimes our customers can provide us steam. Sometimes we have to provide the steam. So you get into those kinds of purpose design options with our customers. But it's a pretty kind of cookie cutter model.
Which policy environments are you most optimistic about right now for your specific business?
For the merchant applications, we're really policy agnostic because as long as we can produce CO2 that meets the required beverage grade or food grade standards, which we do, there's no policy requirements for us to be a commercially viable.
Oh yeah, I mean for your sequestration projects or the desire to maybe grow in some of those areas.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in certain Asian markets like in Japan and in Europe and some in the Middle East is a lot of interest in supporting the scale up of the infrastructure for sequestration and for removals. TBD what happens in the US. We still have 45Q. And at some point it comes down to what's your cost to do this. If we're at a reasonably low cost of CO2 capture and injection, it's as long as we still have 45Q, we think it's an attractive opportunity here in the US. But it comes down to cost and it comes down to bankability. I think, things that SBTI are doing, what's going to happen with some of the UN stuff under Article 6.4. I think there's still, there's a lot to be done to build market kind of, pull signals from the corporate side and from the buyers of removal side that needs to be a lot more robust for this industry to scale to become bankable. I don't know of any, corporate off-taker that's going to give me a 10 or 20 year guaranteed fixed price offtake agreement unless the offtake price for CO2 is very low. And that's really what you need to get the financing to scale these things. So that's kind of the chicken and egg issue I was talking about earlier. And, I think policy is has a huge impact on the viability of that market.
The fact that you are robust might make supporting Aircapture a less catalytic purchase than someone who doesn't have the merchant market for CO2. Have you run into any buyer reticence just on the fact that you don't need our money as much as someone who's only credit oriented?
That's a very interesting question. Not really. I think from an investor standpoint, the investors that are interested in what we're doing are interested, in our technology approach and in our commercial approach. We just haven't spent a lot of time in trying to create, offtake agreements for removal credits or avoidance credits or anything like that. We can compete on price alone for our customers for CO2 versus what they're currently buying with CO2 for. Of course, over time, we will build into those markets and work on developing those methodologies if they're required. But we don't see that as a critical path to making the business work and getting to scale. And as I was talking about, kind of getting on that learning curve, right? That's the name of the game. I think, from our perspective with our team, I say, our job is to solve for scale. How do we do that? How do we do that from a technology standpoint? How do we do that from an investor standpoint? How do we do that from a go-to-market standpoint?
For your tech stack, do you have something equivalent to Oxy's acquisitions? If you were setting yourself up for acquisition, Are you a viable candidate for large scale beverage production? Something else? Like where does your tech stack fit and complement a conglomerate nicely?
Yeah, I mean, so one way to think about what we do, especially on the merchant market side, with beverage and food and things like this, is we're competing with industrial gas companies. So there are industrial gas companies, that are producing or buying CO2 and delivering that to their customers. Every Coca-Cola in the world, every Pepsi, so many businesses, they don't have CO2, they're not producing the product. Food packaging, animal processing, the cold chain. CO2 really kind of runs the kind of global economy in a lot of ways, and it's a robust market. But on the sequestration side, it's a different analysis and it's a different approach. There are industrial gas companies, I think, that are very interested in more reliable CO2 supplies. They have customers that they have a hard time getting CO2 to. It's very expensive. There's supply disruptions. In Europe, there's often supply disruptions this time of year because the price of CO2, the availability of CO2 is a byproduct from ammonia production, so fertilizer production, and that comes from natural gas. So if natural gas pricing is too high, they just stop making fertilizer, and then all the CO2 goes away. And then all the companies that are buying CO2 can't make their beer, can't make their Coca-Cola. So I think there's a lot of interest there. But I think from a larger scale, sometime in the future, sequestration, larger scale use of CO2, I think this sort of, there may be partners that are similar to the kind of Oxys of the world that will make sense. But we're really focused on commercial traction, decreasing cost, getting to scale, driving our costs down, demonstrating to our customers that we're reliable and that they can count on us for a critical input commodity to their business.
Are these gas manufacturers, are they paying attention to direct air capture and modular production of gases? Or is this still sort of a pat you on the head, like, oh, that's cute, come back in a decade? We've been doing this for decades and what you do is not impressive yet.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, are they paying attention? Yes. But the reality is most of these companies have a lot of capital assets in moving CO2 around, right? So if they no longer need to move CO2 around, what do they do with all that stuff? We believe there will come a time when they can't ignore us anymore. But it's going to take some time for us to get there. I mean, we're going to have to demonstrate that we can at scale produce CO2 at a lower cost, delivered at a higher quality and a reliability to anybody that needs it. And then I think it'll become then a very credible and near-term threat to their current P&L.
Probably too late at this point, since you designed this business to be robust in this exact kind of way. But what advice might you give to other carbon removal companies that might be finding themselves in the valley of the shadow of death right now and looking forward to a couple of years of uncertainty, to put it lightly?
I think I have somewhat of a unique approach because I've been working in, engineering and technology development and project financing of CO2 removal technologies for over 20 years. And I think I come from the perspective of how do we make these bankable? How do we make these project financeable? Because getting to the valley of death means you have the commercial traction. And to get the commercial traction, you can't just continuously raise money and sell equity forever. I mean, certain companies can, and they're super lucky, and the market conditions are just right. And but I think that's a very low probability for success. So I think what one has to do is one has to demonstrate commercial traction, customer reliability, and a clear path to get to scale. And what does that actually look like? I don't think it's enough to say, we think we'll be at X dollars per ton in 2030 or 2035. I think it's much more complicated than that. And I think really thinking through the process of what does it take to get there at each technology iteration step and kind of commercial scale, and what does that look like will help set your strategy early on. And I think that's really important.
Thanks for being here, Matt. Really grateful that you're able to share your experience, and congratulations on all of your success.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. Great to chat with you, and look forward to the next time.